have just written a new book in English. It's titled Towards an Alternative Transatlantic Strategy. It's written or translated into French, and in French it's called Vers une stratégie transatlantique nouveau. And I think this book will really rethink the U.S.-European Union relationship in a way that we can begin to resolve the various crises throughout the world, all the way from global warming to the Russia-Ukraine crisis, China, Taiwan, Iran. I tried to develop a global strategy where the U.S. and European unions, for the first time, really work together to resolve these issues, because the time is mounting. We need to engage as soon as possible, and moving towards U.S. and European unity will, at least in policy, will begin to resolve a number of problems, not just on the international level, as I've mentioned, but also the domestic questions of democracy as well. We need to stabilize our democracies and reform them deeply. Working together as the two major centers of democracy is a major theme of this book, as well as trying to resolve the numerous and multiple crises that are confronting humanity. My name's Hall GARDNER. I'm a professor at the American University of Paris. I did my MA and PhD at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C. My first teaching experience was in Hopkins Nanjing in China during the year of Tiananmen Square from 1988 to 89. I then moved to SAIS, Washington, and then to the American University of Paris. I think what's interesting about my career is that because I was in China during Tiananmen Square, I experienced what was happening firsthand in China, but I did other things too. One of my first experiences was to go to Vietnam, where I advocated that the U.S. recognize Vietnam in 1989. I went to Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. During the Tiananmen Square events, I wrote for the LA Times, and that became part of my formation of looking at the world from the Asian perspective. Then I moved to Washington and then to Paris, where I began to be involved in the NATO enlargement debate. I think one of the highlights of my career there was I was invited to engage in Track 2 diplomacy after the Russia-Georgia war in 2008, where we talked about the possibility of a new European security order. Obviously, that didn't happen in 2008, but it's certainly relevant to what's happening now. So over the years, I've written more than 15 books. Those books have all had, most of them have had this a similar theme, that is the uncoordinated expansion of NATO and the European Union would create a backlash, not only in Russia, but China as well, bringing those two together. This, coupled with the support for democracy and regime change, would cause this backlash and the possibility of a Eurasian alliance. It is definitely that the Americans are polarized. The Republicans and Democrats are totally polarized on primarily domestic issues, even though there's disagreements over issues involving climate change and energy use. Nevertheless, when it comes to defense spending and security issues, the Republicans and Democrats are almost unanimously behind the major defense bills that have been passed by the U.S. Congress. In fact, just in the 2022 National Defense Authorization Bill, the Biden administration proposed more than Trump had proposed the year before, but the Congress proposed more and passed more than Biden had proposed. So we have this situation where militarism is pushing the Biden administration towards a stronger or a harder line towards Russia, Iran, and China, because Congress doesn't see the need for compromise, diplomatic compromise, deconfliction, and the beginnings of development of a new implementation, anyway, of a new European and Asian security order. So this is what worries me, is this militarization that seems to be bipartisan. And in fact, and looked at the Senate vote, more Republicans have voted against the defense spending bill than Democrats did. So we have a real issue here. Not only do the Americans have to talk more with themselves to get this polarization somehow reconcile it, but we also have to worry about how we're going to deal with Russia, China, Iran, and the other countries that are literally beginning to unify against us. Ironically enough, Biden has promised multilateralism, but it's primarily a co-optive multilateralism. In other words, contrary to Trump, Biden will try to forge trade deals with the European Union and other countries. He's willing to compromise through the World Trade Organization and work collectively with allies, particularly on the political and economic side. The question on defense, though, and as I just said before, in fact, his defense policy and what Trump called America First, or what I prefer to call peace through strength, it's the same policy, perhaps even more pointed. That is to say, as I just said, the defense spending bill is much higher than Trump's, and furthermore, he has taken aspects of Trump's policies and magnified them. So one, he's continuing with, as I said, peace through strength. He's strengthening the Abraham Accords between Israel, the UAE, and linking Saudi Arabia in those. And he is tougher on Taiwan in some ways than Trump. And though he is trying to make a deal with Iran, there are many factions in Congress that are trying to block any sort of deal there. So though he's softer on Iran than Trump was, this is not necessarily ending in the right outcome in terms of a reconciliation. So he's tightening the alliances with NATO. He's stronger on NATO than Trump was, but he's trying to pull Sweden and Finland into a closer relationship with NATO. At the same time, he's building up alliances with Japan, India, and Australia, in which he really followed through on the Trump policy to sell nuclear submarines to Australia rather than French-made diesel submarines. And this, of course, has alienated France because France has a role in the Indo-Pacific, and this is seen as a unilateral action that's cutting the French out. The question remains, though, he has promised relentless diplomacy. So is this peace through strength policy doctrine really aimed at putting pressure on Russia, China, Iran to reach a real compromise, or is he trying to, as I said, co-opt the Europeans, the Japanese, the Indians, and Australians into a policy that will further antagonize the global system? So what I've argued in my book is we need an alternative global strategy that really engages relentless diplomacy, that begins to transform our relations with these so-called authoritarian states. China and Taiwan, what we need there is get both sides to mutually renounce the use of force, use international mediation. Particularly the European Union has a better relationship now with China than perhaps the United States, so Europe should get involved diplomatically. International peacekeeping and trying to protect the sea lanes that so much trade passes through. Work with China in a collective fashion, multilateral fashion, in order to bring that China-Taiwan conflict to an end. So I've already mentioned Iran. Also, multilateralism is actually key to ending that dispute as well. And if we really engage in peace, then the pieces will begin to fit together. So what I call the development of regional peace and sustainable development communities. This is an idea where we look at the Black Sea, we look at the South and East China Seas, we look at the Middle East. We find areas where countries can work together to develop sustainable energy and work in other sustainable sustainable products that we can sell on the international market. There's two reasons for this. One is the obvious reason to end the climate crisis, to try to reduce global warming. The other is in the immediate self-interest of both the United States and the European Union, and that is to try to reduce the flow of immigration to both countries through the development of Central America, through the development of the Eastern Mediterranean and regions surrounding Europe and the Middle East. The United States and European Union have to work together for the first time. They really haven't been doing that ever since the end of the Cold War, even during the Cold War. So this is the theme of my book that I think makes it different than any of my previous books, and I think absolutely key to beginning to transform the world towards a more peaceful and sustainable planet.